Hello everybody and welcome to this week's video. This week instead of an episode, I am releasing a breakdown video, which will be pretty interesting. It's sort of a cool behind the scenes look at how I create these live action Pokemon episodes. The reason we're doing this is because the next episode is the 10th episode and is the final one in the season, which means that it has to be particularly epic, which means better effects, more effects, and longer. So hopefully y'all will enjoy that episode when it comes out, hopefully next week. Then the series will pick up again after August because August is pretty crazy for me. But anyway, let's take a look at how this shot was achieved. I guess we should take a look at the shot first. Blam! Opens the door. Flies out. That's pretty cool. Let's watch it one more time. And this is a work in progress shot. There is still a good amount of work to be done to this, but let's go ahead and break it down for you all. So this shot of course starts out with a nice background plate which looks like this. It's pretty shaky, it's not very stable, there's not a lot going on here, and that door is not blowing open, so it's not very interesting. So that door is a real door that is actually a part of the barn, and the people who own the barn would be pretty mad if we dismantled that door or blew it up. So we had to do that in post using a CG door, but we had the problem of this door still being here. So what I did is I painted it out, like so. So now we have a barn that does not have a door, and how that was approached was doing a matte painting. So I took a still frame of the footage into Photoshop and used the clone stamp tool to make this still frame of an empty barn wall, and I added that shadow in myself. So then I took that still frame with the transparent background and 3D tracked it in After Effects using the After Effects 3D camera tracker to that wall right there to get rid of that door. Then you'll also notice that this door is being kicked open by two of our actors. In the original footage you can actually see them standing there, which is pretty cheesy. So to get rid of that, I took an adjustment layer and darkened just the barn door using a mask on that adjustment layer that I animated to match the opening. So now there are no people there and that door is just flying open. Isn't that spooky? So after we have this door flying open and that door disappeared, it's time to add in some magical CG effects. This is probably the most time-consuming part of the process because I had to sculpt the character, I had to make that CG door, I had to track the 3D scene, and then I had to get the lighting and shadows right using some shadow catching planes. In Blender is what I'm using, by the way. You can do all this in Maya, you can use whatever 3D app you really want, but I prefer Blender personally because it does it all. But after we add the character in, still we just have this, hole opening up in the door and then the character flying out. That's pretty boring, and he's supposed to be performing Hyper Beam, and this does not really look like a Hyper Beam. So to make this more interesting, first of all, to make the CG elements fit in better, we did some color corrections to the door. You'll notice this shadow was not dark enough, and now it is, and I did this using a mask that I generated in the 3D software. Then I also made one of those masks for Dragonite here, and his color corrections mostly just darkened his shadows to match the shadows of the rest of the scene. He was currently not matching the black point of the scene, and that is not okay. So, moving right along, we have to cover up that hole somehow and also make the Hyper Beam seem more interesting. So, we added in some dust, which is just this fancy little dust cloud here that appears along with the Hyper Beam, and this was approached using Trapcode Particular in After Effects along with a 3D camera that was imported from Blender, so the point sticks in 3D space while it's emitting dust. But that dust isn't enough. We can always use more dust. And this was, again, using a Trapcode Particular system, and this dust adds some sort of smoke-like dust emitting from the door here, which is pretty cool. But that's still not enough. We have to add some debris flying out from the door when it's getting blown up by that Hyper Beam. And the next step was to add the main debris, or the medium-sized debris, which for this I used a Trapcode Particular system for the debris. I used a sprite object with a few different frames that had a few different split wooden planks in it, and I told it to choose a different frame of the animation for each particle. And then I had each of those particles emitting an auxiliary particle system or child particle system that sort of had smoke on it. So we have these nice particles flying out, trailing some nice dust and smoke. But that's not enough debris. I mean, come on, this is wood. Wood splinters like crazy. So then we have these large wooden planks flying out just to add some nice variation to the debris, and they're all rotating in space, and it looks pretty cool. This, again, was using Trapcode Particular. All of these particle systems are using Trapcode Particular. It is a fantastic plugin, and I highly recommend picking it up if you have the extra cash lying around. But that's still not enough debris because, like I said, wood splinters like crazy. So I added in a ton of really small debris right here, which really adds to the effect. It's some nice splintered wood coming from the fractured door area. Bam! And then this dust doesn't really fit into the scene because there's no shadow, and this is pretty thick dust. So I added just a little bit of darkening just for the extent that the dust is there, using an adjustment layer in After Effects, and I animated the mask. So bam, it darkens just like the dust is casting a shadow on the scene. And that just helps it fit in a little bit better. It's not accurate or anything. It's probably not even dark enough, but it just helps that tiny little bit selling the realism. So then one more dust system, also using Trapcode Particular. And this dust system trails Dragonite as he flies out of the barn, sort of like he's carrying some of the dust with him. It just adds a little bit more cool factor to it. But what is causing this dust explosion? That is what you are all probably wondering, and it's supposed to be a hyperbeam, so we have to actually add the hyperbeam effects, and I did that using a plugin for After Effects called Trapcode Form, which is a 3D particle system, so I didn't have to worry about animating the position of this or anything. It stuck in 3D with my imported 3D camera from Blender. I just had to worry about animating it and adding a glow to it in space. So I animated the particle size. Form is a 3D particle system where the particles sort of make a 3D form and they all stay in space. They don't disappear or dissipate or anything unless you tell them to. But just having that beam looks pretty cheesy. Where's the glow? So it has to light up the scene. So I added this adjustment layer to the scene that just sort of lights everything up on the background plate. It adds a little bit of a glow, and that just sort of sells the realism of there being a giant glowing beam shooting from the door. But that's not quite enough. There has to be sort of an impact, an oomph caused by the emission of the beam, and I approached that using a lens flare from the Video Copilot Optical Flares plugin, which sort of blam! It just adds that little bit of punch to the beam. But I said, darn it, that's not enough punch, let's go over the top and add some crazy glow here. Bam! So we added this huge flash of light as it sort of emits from the door, which might even be too much, but it just sort of adds an impact, and it'll really work once we have a sound effect that just goes blam, except it'll be an actual blam rather than me saying blam, because me saying blam would just not be very realistic. But that's what the beam effect looks like. So then on top of that we have one final pass, which is this final dust layer right here, which just adds a little bit more realism to the scene. I approached that using an element from the Video Copilot Action Essentials 2 bundle, which this is just one of their dust elements. I put it on a 3D layer and just let it track with the camera, so it sticks in 3D space while the camera is moving. Which, being able to import a 3D camera from Blender is really, really useful. Bam! So we have this extra dust that's just sort of trailing here and dissipating as the actors are walking out of the barn. Then, after that, you notice this footage is pretty shaky, which makes it feel very unprofessional. So we took this, I used the warp stabilizer in After Effects, which is right here under Tracker, and just sort of stabilized the footage to make it a little bit smoother. I'm only going to cache a little bit of this. But you'll notice there's no more of that fine shake. It's still a little bit wobbly overall, but the footage is so much smoother and it just feels much more professional. And we're almost done here, but on top of that, it's always nice to sort of color grade your footage a little bit just to make it a little bit more interesting. This is an in-progress color grade, mostly that I just made for this breakdown, so no judgment that it looks like an Instagram filter. But what I did is I sort of brought out the blues and the shadows, brightened up the shadows, and sort of brought out the oranges and yellows and the highlights. which just sort of makes it feel a little bit more like sunset. It's a little bit more interesting, in my opinion. And then one more adjustment layer on top of that is a nice vignette, which sort of centers the composition. It makes you want to look towards the center here. And that about sums it up. I hope you all enjoyed this breakdown. I'm going to let it render out here one more time while I talk to you. So the series is going to return after August, because August is pretty crazy for me, but we're also going to make some other more professional short films that aren't on the Pokemon topic. So I hope you all are looking forward to those videos. I hope you enjoyed this breakdown, and if you did, make sure you subscribe for more interesting breakdowns and just more episodes and videos in general. It's my goal to make you entertained. Hopefully this entertains you, and hopefully you learned something in this breakdown, just how many passes and effects go into each of these videos. And this is just one shot. We have about 6 or 7 effect shots in this video total. But you'll see how all this, hopefully you'll see how all this dust and 3D and all this cool stuff fits together in post-production to make one final image. I'm going to have to fix this wobbling right here on the stabilization, but that is quite alright. Anyway, hopefully you enjoyed this breakdown. If you did, if you found it informative or enjoy the series in general, make sure you hit the subscribe button for future videos. I really appreciate it. And other than that, you all enjoy the rest of your week and look forward to this episode coming out hopefully next Thursday.